that. The rollout is for the teams, but as you know, those rollouts often exclude management. And I think in my learnings, in one very large and failed program, basically in hindsight, we recognize that what we've done is actually create additional divides between the software teams and management. The managers were not invited, and I don't attend the Scrum meetings, or I'm a chicken in the back, and basically created a huge division. So I think we don't want to approach Agile with a chip on our shoulder, because we deal with managers who have big shoulders too, and they can have a log on their shoulder if necessary. So let's get off the notion that there's a management class and they're different from us developers, and just realize that managers are people too. There was a blog series that went on our Twitter series that annoyed me at one point. It finally just said that somebody was basically railing against managers, and I said, managers are people just like you, who chose a career to manage people just like you. Okay, so let's stop and have a little bit of respect for this, for the folks that we need. So what do we have to do as managers? We're trained in lean thinking. We base our decisions on this long-term philosophy. We behave as what from the new Tanuki and Nogachi's book. I forget the name of the book. It's called Lean Thinking Manager Teacher. And we used to call him that, but it's too long a title. I can't even spit it out in this class. So be a lean thinking manager teacher. And we've spent over about a year now blogging and talking about these principles and putting it out on the web and getting tons of good feedback. That's the way we develop new content. We post on SAFE in blog form. We open up for comments. We let it soak there for 6 months or so, and we get a lot of input and integrate that and come back. And we've collapsed what was originally kind of 8 key principles into 4. I'm going to just pick and shoot in and out of these 4s and talk about a few things that I think are particularly critical, just to give you a sense. Now, there's more on SAFE, of course, and there's more in training. So if you want the longer course of this, go to SAFE and attend training. But even in training, this is described as a learning journey, meaning that I can introduce some important concepts here, but you can't master them here. Right? We got to get through the shuha process, and just knowing some new ideas and really inculcating those ideas and behaving that way is a different thing entirely. So let's take a look at the first one. Take a systems view. Okay? We need to look at the larger picture. We need to understand that the thing we're optimizing for is the system. Both systems. Who remembers the 2 systems I talked about today, this morning? What was the first system? The system we're building. What's the second system? The organization that builds that system, right? And both of those systems will suffer from that kind of local optimization and selfish trend. Understand the full value chain. I'll just take a quick look at that and come right back to that. Optimize the whole, not the parts of the organization. If you optimize for the whole, by definition, some other elements are going to be sub-optimized. Those sub-optimized elements, so long as they don't understand what the big picture is, while they're being sub-optimized, they don't feel good about it. They're saying, well, why this isn't as efficient as I was, or whatever. It was more efficient when I pulled all the memory in. It was more efficient when I could hoard the UX guy on my team. It was more efficient for me to do my work, but it wasn't optimized from an organizational standpoint. Own the system. Take responsibility for systemic change. I took out the slide. One of Deming's quote, it says, basically, it's kind of an old-fashioned quote. It says, workers are already doing their best. Only managers can change the system. No CEO ever wrote a software development lifecycle guide, and no software engineer ever wrote a security protocol for governance, right? So the people that own the systems that ultimately determine the productivity are the type of people we have in this room. So we can't be victimized by what we've created. That was that was the innovation that got us here when we created those systems, but our innovation needs to move forward. Take responsibility for change. In the rollout of SAFE, we have a pretty strong mantra: train the leaders first so that they can train others, because that scales, right? Instead of even training the Scrum Masters first, which could train others, that kind of scale, train the leaders first, and I guarantee you that scales. And leaders leave that training asking about things like, what are we doing for faster feedback via test automation? And they ask development teams that, and the development teams are going, we're so glad you asked, because just last month you didn't approve a rec for test automation or whatever. Align teams to a common mission. The principle of lean flow is that global alignment trumps local optimization, right? The net output is higher, the flow is higher, the value is higher if you have global alignment across those teams. And just a quick pick here, reminding myself of what I have here. As you look at a value stream, and I have ones from Poppendiek's works that are far worse than this, you look at this fast team, and this is a pretty fast team, right? In 6 weeks they get some work done, but interestingly enough, it's not all that efficient because the total work was 2 hours and 40 minutes and it took them 6 weeks to deploy that. Well, what happened to all the time? All the time was in delays. You want to go fast, reduce the delays, reduce the handoffs, reduce the waits. Here's a lean thought experiment for you. What's the wait time when you approach a service that's running at 100% utilization? What's your wait time? Forever, right? So doesn't it seem like you're waiting a lot? And if you are waiting a lot, what's that saying about utilization? Too high. Utilizations are too high. Can't get anything, can't get any more cars on that freeway, any more people on that train. There's a lecture in here that I can't give that is really a pithy inside point. There's a couple things about SAFe that are a little bit different. SAFe is designed for flow. SAFe doesn't have an inception phase, right? SAFe assumes that you're on a big program and you already have too much to do. How many of you can at least relate to the fact you're on a big program, you have too much to do? You don't have a shortage of backlog, Karen, right? You don't have a shortage of backlog items, Karen, right? You have plenty. The question is, which one do I pick next? It's top secret from Lean Flow. Job sequencing produces better ROI than taking jobs independent, theoretically independent ROI. Big jobs clog the system. Bust big jobs into small jobs and they go through the system more quickly. The algorithm for that is called weighted shortest job first. And you can look that up on SAFe. In SAFe 2.5, it's a little icon with a little kilogram on it, and that stands for weighted shortest job first. We froze version 3 and we went to the last SPC class, our training class, and somebody said, why don't you call that thing WSJF? We were so embarrassed, we said, that's a really good point. So in SAFe 2.5, it's called weighted shortest job first. If you want to know more about it, read about it there, okay? Own the system, right? Only management can change the system. Embrace the Agile Manifesto. Okay? This is not an option. We want to scale Agile, but we're scaling and we're allowing you guys to sprint, but we still have to be that phase 2 design complete milestone. We still have to do that because that's the way the governance model works in our company. You can't do both. They're fundamentally in conflict. They're endemically, inherently in conflict. You can't be an Agile shop and have such a thing as a design complete milestone. You gotta buy into it. Know how to implement XP, Scrum, Kanban, SAFe, and evolving practices. You gotta kind of know it all. Your systems are really, really big and really complex. Don't you need some tools? Could you really imagine that I could bring you one thing, and I won't name the thing because somebody would take offense and say, here's your one tool solution to building MDO software across 170 teams. That's a ridiculous starting point. This is not a zero-sum game. All the learnings we have. Personally, I love use cases. I don't get to talk about it much anymore, but if you're trying to describe a behavior of a complex system where some behavior across systems after systems after systems, user stories don't do it. Let's be honest for a second. User stories don't tell much of a story, do they? So use your brain and use what you've learned and use the right tool for the right thing. Create great software. Empower high-performing cross-functional teams. That's the gift that keeps on giving. Exhibit Kaizen mind and a bias for action. Here's an exercise that if I had 8 more minutes, we would do it. Go back with your teams and sit down with the Agile Manifesto and look at the principles behind the manifesto and go through each and every one and say, does this scale? Or is this just really for small software teams? What do you think you'll discover? Think about the manifesto for a second. What do you think you'll discover? All those principles scale. Methods that we've used to employ the principles may or may not scale. The best requirements in design do come from self-organizing teams. We happen to call that team an Agile release train, as we saw in this room here earlier. Number 3, implement product development flow. Visualize work, expose WIP and bottlenecks. I remember sometimes when you teach and talk, and you know what it's like. How many of you teach? I bet a lot of you teach. A lot of you. Sometimes you teach, the words go out and you're just not so sure, right, Tamara? Is there really anything there? And I had a guy in class, and he was in IT, and he said, I remembered what you said about visualizing work, and I thought that's something I could start with. And he went back to his IT shop, which was, how many of you worked in IT, where you're standing up servers and emails and used to have, the beepers on your belt? Is that a fun job? That's like the worst job in the career of software development, right? You have to oh, by the way, we're moving to the cloud and my boss can't get his email, okay? And it all comes down to me. That's a gnarly job. So he went back to his boss, and outside the boss's window, he simply wrote up stickies for all the stories that they were in process, and he put them up on the wall. And his boss came out a day later and he said, oh my God, there's no way we can complete this amount of work in the time we're given. And how did he know? Because it was visible. You could see it. Here's our challenge. Everything you're doing is intangible. Nobody can see it. And you're a little bit behind, so I'm pretty sure you could do a little more of that stuff, right? If a manufacturing plant is not getting the goods shipped, maybe you're in Moline, Iowa, and they're putting goods on the floor to ship massive combines, and stuff isn't going out the door. There is no temptation to put more stuff on the floor, right? Why not? It's going to clog up the work. You're going to have to move it around to do work, right? You don't throw more work in process on a system that's running slow. When our systems are running slow, what do? You're a little behind on that project. So the needs have changed a little bit. So we still need all of this stuff, and we need this other thing too. And how can you do that? Because you can't see any of it. Invisible. It's hidden. It's the secret knife in your back that's keeping you from making progress. Reduce queues and backlogs. We'll talk about that. Reduce batch size, accelerate feedback. Queues, backlogs, and batch size. Only one of those words resonates with many developers here. Manage and exploit variability with cadence and synchronization. I kind of pounded on that a little bit this morning. So much is variable. What could be routine? Cadence and synchronization are two different words. Cadence means you're going to plan events at a common point in time, thus lowering the planning cost of that activity and allowing you to marshal resources around that activity. Synchronization means multiple events happen at the same time. So a release planning event synchronizes vision and mission. Maybe the day before we integrated and synchronized our code. So cadence and synchronization are our tools to manage the inherent variability of R&D. Limit work in process. Limit demand to capacity. I love the I Love Lucy vignette this morning. I'm going to steal that someplace, and that's going to be really cool because when the chocolate started down the line, okay, I'm going, limit work in process, limit work in process. That's what a lean thinking manager teacher does. They look at that and go, I know what's going to happen. They're going to crank it up. They're not going to manage WIP. Slightly deeper, okay? Cues. We had a really short break. How many of you went to get coffee in the back like me? Wasn't that a fun cue? Name a cue you like. There are no good cues. They're by definition. It's probably the only thing in industry or in sociology right now that you could say is bad. A cue by definition is a bad thing. And we have lots of cues in software. We have them in requirements, we have them in design. And let's just say I have a really long requirements queue, a software requirement specification. Longer queues have longer cycle times, increased risk, higher variability. How come? I'll give you my kind of queuing theory study. I got Reinertsen's book. I was in Munich for a long, snowy, cold, lonely weekend, and I was reading Reinertsen's book. So I went to Starbucks the next day with my iPhone timer, and I was practicing Little's Law. I was trying to measure the average time it took to service somebody in Starbucks, and then the total time for the length of the queue. And I noticed a behavior, which is that as long as there are a few people in the queue, everybody would go into Starbucks and they would go right up there and they would order their stuff. and they were fine. But as soon as there were 12 people in the queue or so, about 10 or 11 is like a magic number, they would walk in and stop their conversation, look around and step back outside. Now I'm on the mall in Munich. What are they stepping outside for? Maybe there's a Costa Coffee down there, right? And why is there higher variability? Well, let me tell you why. So I worked in Chicago for a while, and I went to Starbucks. I have an addiction called, I have to have my caffeine before I teach. And I have double doses of caffeine before I coach release planning, all right? That's really it. So why is it higher variability? Because if I go there, and they started early, 7:30 at that company. If I go there and there's 7 people in the queue, they might just get a venti coffee, and poosh, I'm in and out of there. But if those same seven people buy a heated bagel and a latte with, a super hot no foam thingy, then it takes me a really long time to get my coffee. And the length of time it takes me to get through a queue of that same length is variable, and it's not under my control. It's the same problem in your world, right? Those 8 or 9 backlog features or stories could be really, really hard to get through the system. So go, if you want to go fast, reduce Little's Law, kind of a fancy construct for a simple thing. The average wait time for an item in the queue is equal to the average length of the queue divided by lambda, which is the average processing rate, right? So it's not a complicated law. It's actually, Little was famous for the proof of the law, because the arrival time doesn't matter, variability in lambda doesn't matter, and he proved that law. What that basically says, let's just pretend like the length of your queue is your backlog, okay? Then it says is that the waiting time is directly proportional to the length of your backlog. So how many of you have a big backlog? Committed backlog? Sorry, you're slow. You're slow. Because the average waiting time has to wait all its way through the backlog. So if you want to go fast, you got to reduce the backlog size. Now, here's a thought experiment for you. What's the difference between a backlog and a queue? This is a critical item. Yeah, well, a queue is last in, first in, first out. A backlog doesn't have to be. So you can have a long backlog. If it isn't committed, you're not slow. But if you've committed each of those items to a stakeholder, then by definition, it's going to take you this long. So if the team right next to you has twice the backlog, it's twice as slow. So they could program 30% faster and only be 80% slower. It's just math. It has nothing to do with how fast your team is or how that works. Here's another one, reduce batch size. Small batches go through the system faster with lower variability. This is just a fact, okay? And this is why approaching software development from Lean is so much more informative than approaching it from any other perspective that I've been able to find so far. There's a chart over here on the left that comes from Poppendieck, and it tells a pretty interesting story. It says as the utilization goes up, and as the batch size goes up, you start to get extremely high variation in throughput or cycle time. So as the Starbucks ladies get busier and busier, and as the queue gets longer and longer, the less and less predictable it comes where I'm going to get my latte, okay? And it also says is that utilization and batch size have a nasty interrelationship, such that as utilization goes up and batch size goes up, project slippage rises exponentially with duration. This is just true, right? It's true on the freeway, it's true at Starbucks, it's true in every queue. It's true in your queues as well, but you can't see your stuff because it's intangible, because you haven't adopted Lean or Scrum or Safe or Kanban yet. You haven't made that stuff tangible. When you make that work physics tangible, you'll start to see this stuff. Now here's a thought experiment. What's the batch size for traditional waterfall software development? What's the batch of work? What's the batch? Traditional software development by a waterfall model. What's the batch of work? The software requirement specification, the entire scope. When I move that scope to a software development team or program, what's the utilization of the teammates on that program, typically? Medium, low, high, what? High. What does it say if I take a really big batch size and induce it on a system that's running at high utilization, what's the chart say? I'm going to get a crappy result. How many of you have been involved in large programs that have crappy outcomes from a predictability standpoint? Virtually all of them. So have we just hired people who are fundamentally brain damaged and can't deliver software? There's something just odd about these people. They're just kind of wacko and they can't predict crap? Or is what Deming said is true, is that worker is doing their best, but they're in a flawed system. And they're in a flawed system that doesn't understand these fundamental laws of flow. SAFE is based, and it grows in large part based upon an understanding these fundamental laws. That's why it works, right? We see things work empirically, and then when we understand the theoretical basis, it means that the thing that we worked empirically is not an accident. Your experience, right, is not an accident. There's a reason why, right, that those people working together were able to get a higher fidelity commitment than when they were given the commitment by others. There's reasons behind that. Now, another quick story in WIP. People don't like to think about limiting work in process. It sounds counterproductive. I tell you, I'm sure I grew up in a fair but tough environment, and my dad in the trucking company, we didn't limit work in process. Okay? There was no amount of work that he could envision. We just basically worked ourselves until we ran out of gas and went home tired. That was his idea. But WIP limit is everybody went home whipped. Okay, and maybe there's a form of efficiency there. I went into a company in Chicago 4 or 5 years ago, and a couple things weren't here. This was their Kanban board. Notice this is not a traditional Scrum storyboard. We don't coach that. Traditional Scrum is basically stories divided into tasks, and you track the tasks. That's kind of, I think, at the wrong level of detail, and it's tracking the wrong thing, right? It's not tracking value. So this is actually kind of a Scrum-Bon board, not a traditional sprint board. But the days weren't there, and the rope wasn't there. So the first thing I did was I went over to the printer and I said, somebody please put out the printout Wednesday through Tuesday. And we did that for 2 weeks, and I bolted them on the wall, and I had to rearrange things so that we had a proportional space. And then I said, who has a rope? Nobody had a rope. And I said, what do you got? Somebody had a set of headphones. So we took the set of headphones and we bolted them on there. How's this team doing? How are they going to do it? They're going to land it or not? No. So within an hour of the time I'm there, this is an Agile team, and they're not a bad team for sure. Had a lot of DNA and a lot of key insights, but some things they didn't get. When I put the headphones up there, they went and looked at it, and then went, oh crap, right? Why? They already made their work visible, but not in the context of what they needed to do. So what's wrong with this? What are they doing here from an anti-pattern standpoint? Here, a waterfall in this sprint, right? And moving it through. So we talked about WIP limits with the team. And I said, let's just do an experiment here now. And I've got about a minute, so I'll talk through it instead. What would we do if I came in? I've got a number of nicknames. Some people call me Lean Dean. It doesn't really stick. A couple people are now calling me Scaled Dean rather than Lean Dean. Or Mean Dean, right? Mean Dean that day said, gentlemen, we're going to have a 3-story work in process limit on those 2 states. And they said, what's that? I said, we're not going to have any more stories in there than 3 and 3. Now go back to work, okay? What happens? What does a developer do who just finished story 6 in the absence of a work in process limit? What does he do? He gets another story. Put a work in process limit in place. I just finished story 6. I'm really angry. He's hanging around by the backlog. He's hanging out with the product owner. Please, can I have another story? I want to write some more Java code. And the product owner's going, Mean Dean was here, and you can't do another story. What does he do now? He still's working for the team. He's going to go test. He's going to become a tester. When he became a tester, is his personal efficiency from his viewpoint optimized? Maybe he's not very good at HP Quality Center. Is his personal efficiency? He might argue with me and say, well, I'm not as good at HP Quality. I'm wasting my time. But what happens to the throughput of the team? Goes up. So his local sub-optimization is a team optimization. Work in process, change limits, and drive towards flow. My time is up. Read Don Reinerson's book. Here's the story. Read it once, don't worry about understanding it. Read it again, okay? Understand it this time and apply it. Lastly, just a quick hint here. Knowledge workers are different. They're kind of quirky. They're not, I grew up in a trucking company. They were not knowledge workers, right? Bright people, but there wasn't not a lot of knowledge required to basically be behind the road 10 hours a day. Our people are different, and they think differently. And we, as managers, have an IQ problem. Who here has direct reports? Come on, who here has direct reports? Who here's a manager? Okay, who's close enough as a manager that has a thick skin? I'm looking at you. You have a thick enough skin? We'll find out. So I suggest that as a manager, you have an IQ problem. How many people do you manage?
Directly?
Yeah, directly. 8. So how does their total IQ compare to your IQ?
Much better.
All right. And what's more, they have a thing, and this is serious. That was a joke. This is serious. They have a thing you can never have, I can never have. They have diversity of opinion. So they have 8 times the IQ points that you have in diversity of opinion. You can't outthink these people, okay? What we can do is motivate them. And the thing I'm going to leave you with is when you leave here today, go to YouTube and search out this 12-minute video called Drive, the surprising truth about what motivates us. And after you've done that, I think you'll think a little bit about managing knowledge workers a little bit differently. That's my 25-minute time box. Thanks very much for your time.